Thank you for joining us. I am Miles Taylor with the Renew America movement, and I am excited to welcome you today to a conversation with a very special guest, someone who we have been looking forward to for quite some time. Before we jump into the Ram chat that we have scheduled for this evening, I want to encourage folks to follow us online on Twitter at Renew America, and you also can watch on YouTube a replay of today's Ram chat. But let's jump right in. I would like to introduce our guest for the night, someone, again, I know that I'm very excited for us to speak with. This is a person who exemplifies integrity and courage, and it's someone that you probably came to know on television during Donald Trump's first impeachment, but he's a man who has a much longer and more storied history than that. So tonight we have Alex Vindman on the program. And he's a man who was commissioned as an infantry officer in 1999 into the United States military, where Colonel Vindman served in Iraq, South Korea, Germany, Ukraine, and Russia, among other places. He received a Purple Heart for injuries received while serving in Iraq in 2004, and he went on to serve on the Joint Staff for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon. Later, Alex went, as we all know, to the White House, where he served as Director for European Affairs on the National Security Council, and where he became a prominent whistleblower and defender of our democracy. Alex is currently completing a doctorate in international affairs at Johns Hopkins University, and he is the author of a recent book and New York Times bestseller, Here, Right Matters. Now, interviewing Alex tonight is my colleague, Mariana Mancuso, who is one of our heads of communications at the Renew America movement and a veteran of many state and national campaigns here in the United States. Mariana, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Miles. I am so excited to be here. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, first and foremost, thank you so much for your service, and thank you for joining me this evening.
Thank you, Mariana, and thanks, Miles, for that introduction.
So, Lieutenant Colonel, your story has been inspiring for a lot of Americans, and you immigrated to this country as a child, fleeing the Soviet Union, and you grew up to serve in one of the most influential military organizations, the National Security Council. Right now, tens of thousands of Afghan refugees are being relocated to the United States, but some of the far right are stoking anti-immigrant sentiments. How can we combat those sentiments and welcome individuals into our country?
First of all, please call me Alex, Mariana. It's interesting. I was coming back from the airport just a couple days ago, actually. I was on a research trip to Ukraine working on my doctorate. And upon landing at Dallas, I was going through immigration and passport control, and I saw hundreds and hundreds of Afghans there. Was still probably shocked from a very rapid resettlement. And the least I could do, frankly, was to try to offer a smile and a head nod, a wave of encouragement, because we should be grateful that those people are here. About 100,000 have come here, and they're going to add to our strength. They're going to add to the prosperity of this country. This first generation that came here as refugees, like my family did, is going to struggle. They're going to have a hard time. And I would encourage offering support to those folks. But ultimately, their strength is going to join our strength. We lost over 600,000 Americans due to the mismanagement of a pandemic. We need to replenish our strength. We need the diversity. We need those people to join our melting pot. And I'm frankly, I could easily dismiss this criticism of from the far right. From entertainment media that's critical of refugees coming here. What they seem to miss is the fact that we all came here as refugees. There are very few of us that could claim native roots, and with each subsequent generation, everybody joined this American project, and we forget about the fact that we came from far off lands for different circumstances, as refugees, as economic refugees, as ideological refugees. But we're now all Americans, and these Afghans coming here are Americans. They're future Americans, and we should welcome them.
I completely agree, Alex. So it strikes me that when your family first came to America on Christmas 1979, then candidate Ronald Reagan, he frequently spoke about America as the shining city on a hill, and we lead by example. When you see the far right and their xenophobia and their obsession with power, do you worry about the example that we're basically showing the world?
I do, but unfortunately, this is not a new phenomenon. There have always been uh, self-serving political actors that have sought to exploit fears, legitimate fears, frankly, in a lot of cases, for folks that are concerned about their jobs, that are concerned about this false notion of violence and terrorism stemming from the Middle East. Yes, there have been a lot of problems, but the people that we're welcoming are not going to be part of the problem. They're going to be part of the solution. I'm not saying that we're never going to have any issues. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying the overwhelming majority are going to add to our strength, and we just have to. We've repeatedly over the course of multiple previous generations had to beat back this nativism, this this hatred of different people, especially if they happen to be a different skin tone, and in spite of that, we've maintained that kind of premise of shining city on the hill, and it's amazing to see that in spite of all of these challenges that we have, in spite of the fact that our news media broadcasts the polarized nature of our society, the violence that we've experienced over the past couple of years, people still want to come here because they recognize that this country is different. This country is still a beacon of hope, a chance for prosperity for them and for their children. And that's the, I guess, the message that I want to focus on. I don't want to focus on what necessarily we can't necessarily just deal with what we haven't successfully dealt with as a society. I want to focus on the fact that we have a whole immense portion of the country that does understand the importance of immigrants and immigration, and those might not be the voices that are heard, but they're out there, and I think fortunately those Afghans are going to get a chance to experience some of that welcome and the hospitality that Americans will share with them.
Absolutely. So I'd like to kind of get into your bailiwick a little. Some people have argued that we're actually in the middle of a civilization struggle, one between the old guard of liberal rights-based democracies like America and populist dictatorships like Vladimir Putin's Russia. As an expert on Russia yourself, which knowing that you know a little bit about, do you see the global trends towards authoritarianism so much?
This is something that I'm definitely concerned about. Actually, about 9 months ago, I published an article in Foreign Affairs about the need for democracy to marshal its strength to face the rising tide of authoritarianism. What you have is a China that is a potentially a potent force, a potent alternative vision of the future of humanity, where an authoritarian regime can offer prosperity to some portions of the population in exchange for limited freedoms. And to some, that's enticing. For some that started with very little, the Chinese population in particular, that had nothing 20 years ago or 30 years ago, has experienced prosperity. I wonder though, in reality, whether this tide of authoritarianism, this limited freedom, is a concept that holds. Because as the population starts to prosper and experience kind of become accustomed to comforts, where they're going to demand more. Certainly, Russia poses a less appetizing alternative. In Russia, you don't have that prosperity. You have a much more kind of focused state control of the population, limited freedoms, no freedom to protest, no freedom to speak, no free press, none of the things that we take for granted here. And then, of course, there are the example that those two behemoths pose to the rest of the world, to the Irans, to the North Koreas, to the Venezuelas. You have this surge of authoritarianism in pretty much every corner of the world. And our task as America, as the leader of the free world, is to continue to demonstrate the value of democracy, the value of Western liberal norms. And I think the fact is that we've had some reversals. I think it was Human Rights has suggested that that there has been a consistent kind of a 15-year pattern now of democratic backsliding, and part of that is because the U.S. has been focused on, frankly, endless wars in the Middle East, and has been focused on issues that have distracted from these challenges, these great power challenges from regional and world powers that are challenging the system in order to advance their own singular interests. And the U.S. and the European Union and other democracies, India and Japan, need to consolidate and innovate and come up with, just like Renew America movements trying to do in the United States, do the same thing for democracy around the world. And I think there is, this administration, the Biden administration, is actually moving in that direction. They've made a commitment to try to do a democracy summit this year. Hopefully, they are able to hold to it with a full plate of crises domestically and abroad. But I think there is an opportunity for the U.S. to be the first amongst equals to try to renew democracy.
I have to say, I love your optimism when it comes to just America in general. And in your book, and I wouldn't be able to have a book chat with you unless I brought it up. Here, Right Matters. You astutely point out that we face a bolder, more audacious Russia, which you were alluding to in this previous conversation that you were just speaking on, willing to attack the United States directly, which is, I'm sure you would agree, makes them a far greater threat to the United States than China. So how do we protect America from aggressive actors such as Russia, the influence of authoritarianism, and to ensure our democracy remains intact?
Yeah. Marianne, I appreciate the way you couch that. Frankly, I'm going to go ahead and geek out a little bit and talk about foreign policy and international relations. In my view, my calculation for threat and for adversaries is based on at least two fundamental factors: capability and intent. China has enormous capability, has an economic capability that far surpasses Russia, has a potent military capability, has potent, and I'm talking about in terms of the traditional assessments of national power, diplomatic, informational, military, economic, has a potent informational component. What it doesn't necessarily have is hasn't necessarily decided whether it wants to upend the international order that has allowed it to prosper these previous 20, 30 years. It wants to play on the margins. It wants to use economic coercion. It wants to use different kinds of tools to extract more benefits from the international system that in a lot of ways it wasn't geared to a kind of a rising China. On the other hand, Russia is a completely different kind of threat actor. Russia has both the capabilities, has a potent military, informational, security apparatus, has the artifacts of Soviet power in terms of their role in the UN Security Council and other international organizations. More importantly, has the intent to upend the international system. Putin himself has said that the system doesn't serve him and he will upend it if he doesn't get what he wants out of it, which is in fact a privileged sphere of influence. He wants to reestablish, if not the entirety of the former Soviet Union, he wants key components of that, including Ukraine and Belarus. So like this, he could rebuild Russia as a power, rebuild Russia as a pole in a multipolar world. To me, that makes it a much, much more potent threat. Long term, China is going to overtake Russia. I think I could be pretty confident in saying that. But in the short term, in the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to be Russia. Russia struggling, like a wounded animal backed into a corner to try to hang on to its place in the world. So that was a little bit of a digression. Could you refocus me back on your question?
I would love to. It's completely okay. And when you were talking about that, it made me think about in your book, when you talk about Russia itself as a country, but Russia with Ukraine as an empire. But to bring you back to the question, my question is how do we protect America from aggressive actors such as Russia, the influence of authoritarianism, and ensure that our democracy remains intact?
Yeah. This is a tough issue. I'm going to in part fall back to where I started, where published this article in Foreign Affairs, which is, in consolidating democracies, we will be able to share best practices amongst the democracies on threats they face. So inviting Ukraine, that is subject to Russian hybrid warfare threats, we can understand how they face the challenges. And we'll learn from them, and they'll learn from us. They'll learn from the fact that we've had durable institutions built over decades and centuries that were able to withstand a surge of authoritarianism domestically here in the United States under the Trump administration. So I think that's one of the things we could do. And you'll notice as I couch this issue, we tend to look at foreign policy and domestic policy in two different stovepipes, as if they're they don't have an impact on each other. Of course they do. In this case, what seems to be a foreign policy play, a foreign policy engagement on democracy, hardening democracies, will have a direct impact on the United States in offering some tools that we could apply here to the challenges we face. That's from abroad and domestically. From abroad, we face Russia that's willing to use all sorts of nefarious tactics developed under the Soviet period, or continued to be refined under the Russian period in terms of cyber warfare, disinformation, leveraging social media to identify vulnerabilities and exploit them. And then we face common challenges with our democratic allies around the world, which is, frankly, a growing inequality and a rigidity to democracy that maybe in certain ways hasn't kept pace with where the population needs it to be. It needs it to be potentially more responsive than just election cycles. It needs it to be responsive in the fact that the population could feel like their voice is being heard, that government's responsive, that government's effective, and we could share these are common threats that we see France facing with the yellow vest protests, periodically unrest in India, frankly all over the world. We have these issues, in part being driven by just a exploding inequality between the extremely wealthy and really the rest of us. And I think that's one thing that we need to do. The other thing is, frankly, we can't necessarily look to others to solve our problems. I think we'll get some good tips on where to go. We also need to be a little bit more introspective about the shortcomings of this, still the best leading democracy in the world, still needing to keep pace and continue to innovate, continue to grow. What we sometimes forget is that this democracy has not remained static for decades and centuries. It's continuously innovated. It's continuously adapted to the changing environment. And I think we've kind of frozen in time with decades past, 30, 40, 50 years ago. We haven't had some major changes with regards to voting rights, with regards to how our government responds to criticism, fair criticism by the American population about being ineffective, bloated, overly bureaucratic. And there's a lot more that we can do. Frankly, one of the things that, this is an idea I've had, I haven't necessarily thought it through, so it might fall flat. But we used to have a public diplomacy arm in the White House that in certain ways advocated for what government was doing on behalf of the citizenry. That hasn't been in existence since probably the late Reagan or Bush 1 administration. Why don't we have a public diplomacy arm that does a better job of not propagandizing what government does, but at least explaining to the American public what they get out of the Department of Energy, what they get out of the Department of Education, to counter what is now become a constant, critical thread, and now we're at a crisis point where the Republican Party, far more than the Democratic Party, will to drive votes to serve their own political interests, will tear into government that they have a role in helping to direct and manage, just to not with a intent to improve it, but just to kind of demonize it and destroy. That is not a formula for successful governance. So that's
I would
a long
have
answer.
No, it's fantastic. And I think you kind of you skirted where I want to go. So I'm just going to jump right in if you're okay with that. So for 4 years, Donald Trump steered our national and foreign policy away from our alliances and global systems and toward isolationist and populist nationalism. He attacked NATO and our allies, and of course, when he met with Putin in Helsinki, he famously took the Kremlin line on the election interference of 2016, saying, quote, "I don't see why it would be them." You were actually on that trip to Finland. Was this the moment that you realized Trump would become the largest hurdle in doing your job?
One minor correction, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
It was my first day on the job in the National Security Council was the Helsinki trip. So I wasn't on it, but I had just joined the White House. I was doing the typical kind of onboarding, the human resources briefs, getting badges and stuff like that. And I turned on the news just to hear this catastrophe of a press conference. I wish that Fiona Hill had done as she had joked on several occasions and pretended a fainting spell to take that thing off the air. But that was my first day on the job. But my lessons drawn from that are actually, that this was going to be an enormous challenge to get the president to realize the true threats emerging from Russia. And one of the reasons I joined the White House, and I talk about this in the book, is that I thought I could be constructive, in a way maybe best suited to fill that role. I thought, as a New Yorker, as somebody that kind of understood, at least in part, understood what he thought, like highly transactional. I could paint a picture for him in economic terms, in transactional terms, why Russia's a threat, what it was going to do to American power, and I thought that having drafted the most important documents that we had in the Defense Department on Russia as a threat adversary, the national military strategy, Russia Annex, and the global campaign plan for Russia, pulling together all the resources and coming up with kind of concrete activities that we could do. I thought I could aid that effort. I learned, I knew that it was going to be an uphill battle before that. I just kind of, I wouldn't say it was insurmountable after watching the Helsinki press conference, but I knew, it was going to be even more stacked against me. But there was another facet to this that actually, kind of was the direct line to my role in the Ukraine call and the Ukraine scandal. I think after that episode, Fiona, who was my boss on the National Security Council as a director for all of Europe, a senior director for all of Europe, she realized that there was less that we could do directly with regards to Russia. We had a very robust national security strategy, and we had a kind of a framework for how we're going to manage Russia. But she also knew that there was probably not as much as we would want to do with regards to pushing back on Russian aggression. So she asked me, "Hey, Alex, you speak Ukrainian. You learned Ukrainian in the Defense Language Institute. How would you like to pick up Ukraine as part of your portfolio?" I was like, "Sure, happy to help." And that, because I wasn't there for Ukraine, I was there for my Russia background, and that was kind of a fateful decision.
So, and yes, and it wound up, I'm not sure if you'd say it worked to your advantage or disadvantage, but I want to fast forward now. A new president in Ukraine has been elected, and that's now a key part of your portfolio. In your book, you talk about your nervousness heading into the July 25th call, where you would be in the room where it happened. And I'm not talking about the compromise of 1790, but I'm talking about the phone call between Trump and newly elected Ukrainian President Zelensky. Do you believe others had the same trepidation heading into that call in the morning? And you did talk about in your book when you were heading over there and you were having this conversation saying, I think legal needs to be on this call, and it was kind of brushed off. But do you think other people had the same trepidation that you did, given the fact that previously the White House had just stopped aid from going over there on July 3rd, and now here we are, on the 25th of July, and Ukraine needs aid, and the new president's elected, and they're having a call? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. I thought you were referring to the room where it happened, to John Bolton's book. But no, so he was concerned about it. As a matter of fact, we'd been watching this unfold for the preceding several months. We'd seen John Solomon from the Hill and Rudy Giuliani start this enterprise to first kind of dispense with Masha Yovanovitch, who's an excellent ambassador and who was going to kind of try to keep the U.S. policy with Ukraine on course. And then we saw, Don Jr. finally tweet about Masha Yovanovitch and her being removed, which is just kind of a surreal event that the offspring of a president could attack an American, the representative of the United States in Russia, and have her removed. And in the subsequent months, we had the freeze on security assistance, and I brought that out of the shadows. It was initially it was kind of Mick Mulvaney looking to just put this hold, which they're actually not technically able to do. The hold was like the Office of Management and Budget saying the congressional notification can't move forward. Usually it's one of those things that it's administrative. You change the language or something like that, and then it moves forward to where it needs to go. But they held it up, and that was the basis: is to hold up the notification in Congress. That's how they put the aid on hold. And I took it out of the shadows. I put it back into the national security process and made sure I got on record the fact that it was, this was coming from the office of the president, Mick Mulvaney. The only thing that was missing by the time we got up to the 25th was, because we already knew that the chief of staff was involved, was the president's own direct hand in this. And I think, in fact, there were plenty of people that were concerned. John Bolton, after I submitted the kind of a request to have this phone call, killed it. He didn't want it to move forward. He perceived the risks. I submitted it because it was the at least the right thing to do to push it up for consideration. And in spite of the fact that he killed it, this phone call happened several days later because, again, Mick Mulvaney and Gordon Sondland had this drug deal in place to get the Ukrainians to commit to an investigation into President Biden, then Vice President Biden, in order to allow the president to kind of steal an election, something that he tried to do for the next year and a half after that. And there were plenty of concerns. Tim Morrison, the person you referred to, that discounted whether we should have legal in the call on that call, knew what the situation was. He had been fully briefed by me. He'd been fully briefed by Fiona Hill, and I'd been submitting reports to John Bolton and the National Security Council like multiple times a week on what was going on. So there were plenty of people. It's just that some people, most of them, didn't do the right thing and didn't live up to their oath to kind of defend the Constitution. And as a military officer, as a service member, there was zero doubt in my mind of what my obligations were, and I was going to live up to my oath to continue to protect this country, prevent the president from doing something unlawful and upending free and fair elections for the United States.
Now, so it's almost as if you were following my train of thought, because after that happens, after the call takes place and you hear the president say, "Would you do me a favor?" You head over to your twin brother's office, Eugene, which I get a kick out of, the fact that you refer to him as your little brother because you're twins, and you report immediately what you heard. In your book, you say, quote, "While I knew that others in the White House basement had heard what I heard, I didn't think anyone else was going to do anything about it." Why do you think or believe that nobody else was going to report what you heard on the call? Because when I read that, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I couldn't even believe that was even a question. But why do you think no one else was going to report this?
It's interesting. I tell you that I didn't deliberate for a very long time. I didn't deliberate at all. I mean, it was the walk from the West Wing to the third floor of the executive office building, like a 3-4 minute walk. I was considering how things could unfold because I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to beeline over I was going to tell my brother, so like this, I could pull him into to be a witness to me making this report to the senior most officials, legal officials in the National Security Council. And I knew it was my responsibility. I was the staffer responsible for Ukraine, and I didn't have to deliberate very long on whether other people were going to do it or not. It fell on my shoulders. I was going to do it. But at the same time, I did recognize that, other people were either ill-informed, didn't understand, weren't tracking the background, watching this train wreck unfold for the preceding months. Other folks were, it wasn't squarely in their portfolio. And other folks were political operatives, frankly, political operatives that were more concerned about their own political viability, about their own tenure, and put that ahead of the country. And that's just something that, it's shocking, and something that I couldn't in any way stomach, but happens way too often, frankly.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you were upholding the oath you took to defend our country from threats both foreign and domestic and doing your duty. You tried to make your stand the right way through proper channels, and ultimately you were forced into the public eye. You had to testify before Congress, and your life became broken into two phases, as you describe in your book, before impeachment and after impeachment. So crossing that threshold where your life turns upside down, no doubt it has to be daunting. And I know that there's a lot of honorable people who were forced into similar positions during the Trump presidency, but what forced you to kind of take that leap and come forward? I mean, you had to expect some type of backlash or consequences. You did talk about how there was like this whisper campaign and you were ostracized from key meetings, from your portfolio. I mean, what was it that you were like, this could happen, but I have to do this?
I recognize that the Trump administration was notoriously vindictive. I mean, we would have these Fridays, firing days, and stuff like that, which I get a chance to experience, months down the road. And I thought I was certainly putting together my cherished tenure at the National Security Council at risk. And I shouldn't in any way underestimate the importance of that, because every day I went into the National Security Council, every day I walked onto the White House, I was that feeling of like awe that I was serving in that role, serving the nation in a capacity that was impactful. I didn't miss it. So that was not a small price to pay. But I thought that would be, that might be the end of it. I did not necessarily calculate. I was concerned about it, but I did not necessarily calculate out that my military career was going to be done, because I was part of a values-based organization, Army and the Department of Defense. We try to inculcate this loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage into our soldiers, into our officers, and I expected the department to live up to those same values. And I wasn't being entirely naive. I certainly understood that that senior military officers are inherently political. I'm not talking about like a partisan Democrat or Republican, but they're political animals that understand how to maneuver in a perilous political environment. And in that case, in the Trump environment, they just decided to hunker down. They were tacitly complicit with retaliation against me because they didn't want to put their own careers at risk. That's something that I didn't, I didn't fully calculate out, or I had some wishful thinking about, because that's not the way I operate. That's not the way, the vast majority of the military operates. But that's unfortunately the way too many senior military and civilian leaders in the last administration operated. It's pretty damning, but it's also an important thing to say. When I first started speaking on this topic, and I was critical of the military, I was a little bit concerned about the fact that if this is my organization, an organization that I loved, an organization that I benefited from immensely, and how do you kind of reconcile the two? But now it's amazing. A month on from really starting public engagement, we've had a traumatic event occur for U.S. foreign policy and for the world with regards to Afghanistan. And I think a lot of that fault falls on the shoulders of the military, the shoulders of military officers, senior military officers that protected their career instead of speaking up, instead of identifying the risks, instead of identifying the fact that the mission was failing at any point in the previous 20 years. And instead, we spent immense blood and treasure, and now we're experiencing the consequences of that because our senior military fell short. That's really the only way you could look at it.
Yeah. No, I was really saddened to see in your book about how the military essentially turned their back on you once you became what they deemed kind of, a problem, right? It was just an issue. And, as we kind of round out toward the end of this interview, I just have one final question. So I think your book is compelling. I literally 10 out of 10 recommend everybody grab a copy. Head over to Amazon, make sure you buy a copy of Here Right Now Matters. But I think it's extremely compelling because it tells the story of someone who's a beneficiary of the American dream. And you devoted yourself to serving our country. You were bound by your principles, only to find that the president himself was working with and dragging the nation toward the community of illiberal dictators. But when you witness this actual genuine moment of corruption and abuse of power, and something that the president could be impeached for, those principles, you were forced in that moment to stand up and take action. So I would ask you, what is the biggest lesson that we can take away from your story?
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting. I think in writing this book, I attempted to answer that question. What is the takeaway from this experience? And one of the conclusions I drew, first of all, for those that haven't read it, it's a pretty and feel both saddened and deeply concerned about the country. And I'm concerned too. But I think if you read the book, you might sense that I still remain optimistic about our future, and that's because there are countless public servants, countless wonderful Americans, both in service to this government and just living their lives, that will keep this country strong. We just need to shake off complacency, disabuse ourselves of the fact that this country will just continue to thrive without our each of our contributions to make it better. That's the biggest risk. But I guess what I would say is my ability to manage this difficult circumstance was a sum total of everything that I had learned, everything that I had absorbed over the course of my life. That's my immigrant background. That's the lessons I learned from my father, and that he passed on from our ancestors, and from folks in the old country, I guess. It's the decades of military service and lessons learned through failure and success. It's the skills acquired as an attaché. It's all of it that came together that allowed me to make a pretty simple decision about what was right, but not just to make a decision about what was right, but how to do the right thing in the right way. And that's probably one of the key lessons is that you could frankly train yourself to do the right thing in the right way, and that's through incrementally every time you're faced with a challenge, consider what the right thing to do is, make that hard right decision, and then when you're faced with a kind of like this what seems to be an insurmountable challenge, maybe similar to the one that I faced in some way, that you have armed yourself because you've done the right thing repeatedly to do the right thing, and then rely on your experiences to help navigate these difficult challenges.
Well, I love that advice, and I think that that's wonderful. And now I just want to turn it over to Miles, who will close us out. So thank you first and foremost for a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, you, Alex, let me echo that. I'm very happy to consider you not just a former colleague, but a friend. And I think that a lot of us in our group of friends look up to you as someone who's really demonstrated true courage on the national stage. So thanks for everything you've done, brother, and thank you for joining us tonight. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
In the meantime,
I just want to say thank you, and I'm glad to be in this fight with you. Renew America movement, renew democracy. We're in it together, and I'm glad that we have all these honorable public servants working trying to row in the same direction and make this country stronger. So thank you.
Yeah. I mean, look, you and I, Alex, had both planned on spending 2021, chilling out and maybe doing things in the business world, and then January 6th happened, and I think both of us have found ourselves staying in this fight. And so I think we would urge people that are watching to do the same. Stay in this, stay committed. It's critically important, and that's actually a good segue. In about a week and a half or so, we're going to have another very special guest talking about these issues on September 14th. So in about 2 weeks, on September 14th, Lee Drutman, who is a senior fellow at the New America Foundation, is going to be joining us on our RAM chat. If you have not looked at Lee's work, take a look at him online. This guy knows what he is talking about when it comes to breaking the two-party monopoly, or duopoly, rather, in American politics. He's done some amazing research on the subject. We're going to have him on to talk about the future of American democracy. I hope you will join us. Please follow Renew America at Renew America on Twitter, or follow us on YouTube at Renew America Movement. Thank you again for joining us tonight. Thank you, Alex, for joining us and for everything you've done to serve this country, and Mariana for leading us through this evening. We look forward to talking to you soon. Onward.